If you've listened to our podcast at all, you know that Dusty and I love to tell the story.
We sure do. And we lots of fun ones. And
we like to hear them as well.
I do. The stories of the songs, story of the writers, story of the singers, the artists, the people behind the stuff that helps get great music and such out there.
But if they've listened to it, they know that normally there's bumper music and there's a stock intro that we usually play. Today is different.
Yeah.
We have a very special guest. Everything about today is different. Yeah. And we are so honored to have Miss Lily Isaacs here.
Yes, we are.
Thank you.
And most of the time when people come in, I've known them for a long time. I know their stories. We just met last week. And we reached out to you before we met. I think it was back in November. And the reason we reached out was there had just been the attack on the Israelis.
Yeah.
And everybody was talking about it. I had a friend that in Christian music that he took his first trip to Israel, and the day he got there, the bombing started.
Oh, no.
And I also have to tell you that is the one place in the world that I've never gotten to go that I hope I get to go sometime. And I don't know if you know the name Alfred Edersheim. Are you familiar with any of his books?
It sounds familiar to me.
He's a biblical scholar, but hundreds of years ago, and he's got a book called The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah that's real thick. And so when I would read about the disciples at the Last Supper went out and they sang, in Alfred Edersheim's book, he would say they went out and they sang this psalm, the Hallel, and he went into such detail. So I've been a student of all this. He's got a book on the temple, and I can almost visualize the courts and the amount of steps, but I've never gotten to go there.
Well, you need to go someday.
I hope so.
It's beautiful.
I will make that happen. It just hasn't happened yet. So when all this stuff started happening, and doesn't matter what news source you listen to, you're under the influence of wherever they want you to think and believe to a certain extent. And the reason we reached out to you when the invasion first happened back in October, I think it was the first week of October, is I knew your story. And I wanted to hear you tell it. I wanted you to have the opportunity to say, okay, if you didn't watch any news on the news, if you didn't read anything on the internet, here's my story. And I think it's worth telling. And this is a departure from our normal podcast.
Yeah.
But we are so honored to have you here. And the other thing, and then we'll get right into it, but when I say, hey, we've got a special guest, Lily Isaacs of the Isaacs.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I think is so incredible is the Isaacs are, in our world, are a name that everybody knows. And then what is so cool and precious to me is that Lily shares this story. I was thinking there was something you just, at the awards show the other night, at the Absolutely Gospel Awards show, they got up and thanked, and they were so gracious and loving about Becky. And Lily talked about what the situation very briefly and very carefully, but all of a sudden it pricks your heart and you think, And that's what I've always admired about Lily is she's always, at least I've known him probably 30 years, and you've always talked about it. You've always talked about it. So I'm anxious to hear her story. I mean, I've read her book, both of her books, but I'm anxious to hear.
I'm impressed that you've read a book. That's
big
stuff.
Two books. Two books. But I'm thrilled that she's here with us. I'm just absolutely thrilled.
And so we could bring her in and we could say, hey, let's talk about the music career of the Isaacs.
Because it's incredible.
Yes. And it's worth 10 podcasts of the musical story. Yeah. We could have an interview about y'all being members of the Grand Ole Opry.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Big deal.
We could talk about
there's so many
Reba McEntire.
Oh, you goes
on tour with Reba.
I mean, At the Hollywood Bowl. I should remember.
The
That's
Hollywood Bowl.
One of the things I'm so jealous that I didn't get to go to it.
Aw.
I thought you went everywhere.
No, I didn't get to go to that. Ed Leonard did.
All right.
And he loved it. I mean, he came back beaming about it.
That was pretty awesome. Yeah, I saw the pictures.
And they shared Jesus.
So, what most people might know about you is that you've got a story to tell about the Jewish people. What they may not know is how close you were to the story. And why don't you just give us a short synopsis of what you grew up in, and let's just see where the conversation goes. Is that okay?
Well, first I want to say thank you for having me. And I think that God spared my parents to have me as a child, and I have 3 amazing children and 8 beautiful grandchildren. And I never want this story to die. It can't. It's part of history.
Yeah.
And so many of our young people in our world today don't even know what happened. But I'll start from the beginning. My mother and father are both Polish. So they were born in Poland, and they lived in a little town called Częstochowa, Poland. They didn't know each other at the time. But when World War II broke out and the Nazis came in to invade all of Europe, they came into Poland on September 1st, 1939. And of course, in those days, you didn't have radios, didn't have any means of knowing what was going on. But my father said that all of a sudden these big military trucks came into the towns with the Nazi soldiers, and they get on these megaphones, and they would say, "Everyone out of your homes, everybody out on the street." And they'd walk up and down and knock on the doors and make sure everybody in their homes went out on the street. So my father was 20 years old, and he was living at home, had 5 siblings and his parents. And of course, they all just walked out on the street.
Yeah.
The same with my mother. They didn't know what was happening. And so at that point, when everybody got out on the street, they made the people lie down on the ground with their face to the ground and their hands behind their head. And within just a few hours, fathers and mothers were separated, mothers from children. Families were just divided and sent different places. And that was the last time my father saw his family. And he had one brother that went to the same camp that he went to, but he never saw the rest of them again. Same story on my mother's side. Her parents were at home. She had 2 sisters and a brother at home. And she never saw them again, except for the one sister that went to the same camp she did. My mother was 17 at the time, and they both wound up in concentration camps. My father was shipped to a camp in Poland by train. They took 3 days and nights on these trains. No food, no water, no toilet facilities, and packed in like sardines and got them to these camps. My father was taken to Buchenwald concentration camp. My mother was taken to another camp called Bergen-Belsen, both of them in Germany. One of the stories my mother told me that I'll never forget is they didn't have any water, and if it happened to rain outside, if there was a little crack in the top of the train, everybody was fighting to try to get their mouths open to get a little drop of that water.
Unbelievable.
And when people would die of thirst or starvation or whatever, or they couldn't fall down on the floor. They were standing dead, and it was just a horrible 3 days. And so they wound up in concentration camps, and I could take all day just telling the stories that they have told me, what they lived through, the horrors of how they got 1 piece of bread a day, had to stand in line for hours if it was 10 below 0 or 110 degrees outside, no shoes, barely had clothing on their back, and stood in line for hours for 1 piece of bread a day. That's all they got.
Wow.
And then they were made to do slave labor. My father had to carry bricks up a ladder and then come down and get them, and up and down and up and down. So one day he stopped just to take a breath, and a soldier saw him stop. So he took the brick out of his hand and hit him in the head with the brick. And my father fell to the ground, and he could have died there.
Yeah.
But I don't know how he mustered enough strength to get up and carry that brick back up that ladder. And just stories upon stories that my parents have shared with me, how they just lived through that nightmare.
But they lived.
But they lived.
Now, how did they meet?
When they were liberated when the war was over in 1945, they were liberated. After liberation, there were so many millions of Jewish people that didn't have a place to go. Their homes were destroyed. They were in Germany. They weren't even in Poland. They had no place to go. So a lot of organizations like the Red Cross, United Jewish Appeal, B'nai B'rith got together in the world and made these relief camps in Germany where these people could go and get nursed back to health, get right meals that they needed, and stay there and live there. So they had huts that they'd put them in and nurse them back to health. So my parents met in one of those French Army relief camps in Germany, in Munich. And that's where they met. And I think the connection was because they were both from Częstochowa.
Yeah.
And they got married there.
Wow.
And
Wow.
then I was born there.
Wow.
And they stayed there another 2 years. So I was 2 years old. When, in those days too, if you were an immigrant and you wanted to go anywhere in the world, you had to have someone sponsor you.
Right.
It's not like it is today.
Right.
My mother had an uncle. Her mother's brother moved to America before the war. So when they found out, they reached out to him, and he sent for us to come. So my mother and father and me, I was 2, came over on a ship. Took 2 weeks from Germany to New York, where my uncle met us. And it was, my father would laugh because my mother was so nauseous. She was throwing up all the time. So he had to hold me in one arm and help cook meals with the other arm. So he would laugh about that. But we landed in New York City via Ellis Island.
Yeah.
And we just stayed in New York. My father helped my uncle helped my father find a job. He taught him how to become a bread baker. My parents had to go to night school 4 or 5 nights a week to learn English. And we applied for citizenship. And when I was 9 years old, we had to live here 7 years before we became citizens. When I was 9 years old, my parents and I went to Ellis Island again. And that's when we held our hand on the Bible and one hand on our heart. And we promised to be good Americans. Wow. And I have that document sitting on my dresser today because I never will forget how proud we were to be Americans, you know? Because this country gave my family a chance at life. But that's kind of how it began. And again, as a little girl, I heard all these stories from my parents, and I respected them for surviving.
So the stories that you heard sound a whole lot like what the stories that I read in history books. And I can imagine, I remember years ago when the Spears went to Germany and the wall was still up, and we went through Checkpoint Charlie, and they took us to a little river, and they said, "Now don't look at the East German side because you could see the guards over there." And we were standing in a cemetery, and I looked down at one of the graves, and it was a stone, just a simple stone, but it was marked with a lady's name, and the person leading us said, "Now these are the people who died trying to escape." But what caught my attention most about the stone was the age was the exact same age as mine.
Yeah.
So when I'm just looking at what I thought was old history, and somebody my age died on that spot trying to find the freedom, that when I see it taken for granted, it pierces me in a way that very little else does. And I can't imagine, if I feel that way, what that's like when you watch some of the things that you see, because you know the cost better than most.
I was young, but watching my parents try to blend into our culture the right way, I'm so proud of them for doing that. And
did they talk about it a lot?
They did.
How old are your siblings? Are they younger than you?
I have one brother that's 5 years younger than I am, so he was born in America.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I was very curious when I was young, old enough to understand what they'd gone through and asked a lot of questions. I remember going to Ellis Island. I was 9, so I remember it like it was yesterday because we had to dress up.
Yeah.
And I mean, we stood in a line, and it was exciting.
Yeah.
So it meant
the pictures
at
Ellis Island are the families lined around the building holding their suitcases, and you go, "That's all they had."
That's all they had.
And there's a monument out there with all the different names, and I found my dad's family came over from Scotland, and I found Clark is a common name and all that, but I found one, and I said, probably not him, but I'm going to act like it was.
Yeah.
So I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a story about your mother and her sister going in different lines.
Yes. So when they got in line for their one meal of the day, that piece of bread. They had to make 2 or 3 lines because there were so many women, girls. So my mother was always close to her sister Zlata, which, by the way, in English is Sonia. That's how she got her name.
Interesting.
Yes.
I did not know that.
So my mom and Zlata were always together, and then they had a friend that they made in the camps that was from the same hometown. Her name was Frida and Sabrina. I'm sorry, Sabrina. So they were in line to get bread, and they were together. All of a sudden, one of the soldiers grabbed my mother by the arm and said, "You go in this line." And he took her away from the line from her sister and her friend. Well, Sabrina said, "No, she's staying here with me." And they let her. I thought, how quickly could that soldier have just shot her for disobeying?
Yeah.
She saved my mother's life, because after the day was over, my mother found out the line that they were putting her in went to the gas chamber.
Oh my goodness!
I mean,
See that right there.
Those aren't stories you make up. And I remember reading that one of the things that caught my attention was something about how many people after the liberation came didn't live very long because they didn't know how to exist in a world where they were free.
Also, they were malnourished.
Yeah.
Yes.
And a lot of people didn't know how to address that, because when your stomach shrinks
Yeah.
and you eat too much, my father had a brother that died because his stomach burst.
Did your mom's sister? I'm sorry, I cannot remember this. Did she get out?
Zlata?
Yeah.
Yes,
She
she did.
got out too.
She got out with my mother, yes.
Okay.
And then my father got out with his only one living brother that was left.
Okay.
So let me ask you a question. That hearing the stories and about people waiting in line, and I have an uncle who escaped from a POW camp in Germany. So that's always been a thing at our house where we've grown up with that story. But I'm hearing you tell the story and going, what a sweet irony that your dad had experienced hunger on that level and became a bread baker.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was that ever?
I hadn't thought about that, but it is in a way. But I did want to share one story about
Sure.
my father's family, because I just learned this in 2018. We've been blessed to go to Israel over the last 30 years 17 times.
Yeah.
We try to go every other year. We love the land of Israel. I have 2 first cousins that live in Israel, one on my father's side, one on my mother's side, and we just love to go and take people. But in 2018, it was the 70th anniversary of Israel being a Jewish nation. And we'll get into that later, why that happened. But we wanted to do something special because it was an anniversary, the 70th anniversary. So we decided, you know what, let's start taking up donations in our concerts and just start a foundation. And we'll just take it to Israel, because at that time there were still probably 100,000 Holocaust survivors still living in poverty.
Wow.
And we wanted to do something special. So that's the way we started it, and went to Israel and teamed up with some organizations there, the Joseph Project and all these places, and blessed, I forgot, we gave away $50,000, $75,000 then to these organizations so these Holocaust survivors could eat. We blessed an orphanage, which we still do, with children and that kind of stuff. But I always had it in my mind, when we go to the Holocaust Museum, Yad Vashem, in Jerusalem, it's a very somber day for me. We spend the whole day there.
I've been there.
You've been there, so
it's
you
very,
know.
It's very quiet. And
Quiet.
As it should be.
So much.
It is.
Yeah.
You do. Mm.
But I made a connection with a lady there one time when I went, so I emailed her. And I asked her, I said, I know very little about what happened to my father's family. And he's passed away. He never knew what happened to them. If you ask him a question, what happened to your family, Dad? He said, oh, they died in the war. Yeah. That's all we got out of him. Yeah. He didn't know.
Yeah.
So this lady said, if you'll bring the documents with you when you come, we'll look it up. So we went to the Holocaust Museum. I got to enter my mother and father's name into the Holocaust Hall of Remembrance. So their name got up on this big wall. And I gave her the documents, copies of them. Within a month, she emailed me back and said, this is what we found out. So I still have to.
Wow.
What happened was my father and his brother were taken to Buchenwald. All the rest of his family, 4 siblings and his parents, were taken to Treblinka concentration camp in northern Poland. And they were all exterminated in the gas chambers, and their bodies burned to ash. Yeah. And another thing I learned about that camp was that I never understood why they would shave the heads of the prisoners and shave all the hair off their bodies. I mean, you see movies that way, and I started digging into that, and I cried for days. I couldn't even be alone. I went to my kids, and I said, "Oh my God, look at this," and it just grieved me because my father never knew, and I'm kind of glad he didn't, but still. And so I started researching Treblinka concentration camp, and why did they shave the heads of everyone? And I thought, well, maybe it was because of lice, or you'd think
that's
that,
what
right?
you would think.
That's what I'm thinking.
Well, come to find out that when they burned the bodies, that the only thing that gas doesn't destroy is hair. And when the soldiers would take the bodies out of the gas chambers to burn them, they didn't want to get infected with that gas. And the only thing it would stick to would be hair. So that's why they shaved the hair. For no other reason, because they didn't want to get infected with that poison gas that they put on them. And I thought, what? How inhumane. You know, these people in line to get their heads shaved and then taken to a chamber where they're killed anyway, but it's because the soldiers didn't want to get infected. Oh my God, can you believe that?
No.
And so things like that just break my heart. I don't understand how people could be so cruel to one another.
So you come to the Bronx, and you become a citizen, and you obviously had some pretty amazing musical talent because you signed a deal when you were, 19?
I was 19.
With Columbia Records?
Yes, sir.
She's a hippie. She's a hippie artist.
Once a hippie, always has to be dusty.
I agree. You know how I feel about that.
So, yeah, Dusty's a closet hippie.
She knows I am. We like to push it just a little bit.
I'm giving you the peace sign.
I know, right here too, right here.
And so a musical career, I remember reading that it was a struggle for your mom, I think, when you dropped out of college to pursue music.
Yes.
But you were also aware that what education must have meant to her in the way that she grew up.
Yes.
And so then there's a story about you meeting a bluegrass player from Kentucky, and he was from a family of 17 kids.
Yes,
is that right?
The baby of 17, and his father was a Pentecostal preacher.
Okay, so where he was from in eastern Kentucky, if you go about an hour east of there, a little town, a county called Magoffin County, is where my mother was born.
Oh, wow.
And she was the youngest of 9,
Wow.
and the Pentecostal preacher. And I've been to some of those mountain homes, and Skaggs, and a lot of them are from that eastern Kentucky area. So none of this is making sense. And I remember you went to visit Joe's family, and
well,
it had to have been a completely new world for you.
I just want to say one thing about the Columbia album that we did.
Yeah.
Is I met a girl in college who was also a singer. And
Maria.
in those days, Maria, you'd sit around in the dorms and you'd have these folk guitars, Nylon string guitar. Everybody wanted to be Peter, Paul, and Mary, or Simon and Garfunkel.
Yeah, you're right. That was the era.
Right. And we wrote songs in college. And so this kid came up to us and said, "Do you want to sing at this party in Long Island?" And we said, "Sure, we'll come." So a couple weeks later, we go to Long Island and we're singing and doing our thing. And this one young man, he looked like he was about our age, 19, 20. He came up, he said, "Do you guys want to audition for a Columbia Records?" And we said, "Yeah, sure." We just thought he wanted our phone number.
Yeah.
Well, I saw the pictures. I can understand that too.
You're exactly right.
So we did, give him our number, and lo and behold, a couple of weeks later, he said, "Well, I've set up an audition for you guys to come to Columbia." And so we freaked out. So we ironed each other's hair on an ironing board then. We didn't have a flat iron, Found the biggest bell bottoms we could find. And we took the subway and went to 57th Street, walked into that room, and there was a big round table. There were about 6 or 7 gentlemen there from the organization, and they said, "Sing your songs." So we sang them about 3 or 4 songs and walked out of there with a contract, and we were shocked.
And $10,000 advance, is that what I remember?
It was shocking, and they said that we would have to take 2 or 3 months of our life to do the album. That's why I left college, to get to that point.
Yes, sorry.
I was getting to that. So it was such a big opportunity because such a major label that I didn't want to give up that opportunity. Things like that just don't happen, right? And my mother was a singer. She wasn't a professional singer, but she'd sing around the house all the time. If we went to Broadway shows, it was me and her.
Really?
She loved Broadway acting, and she'd dance around the house and sing, and had a really pretty voice.
So she had to know that struggle.
She had to know,
Yeah.
and I talked to her, and I said, Mom, I'll go back,
Yeah.
but of course, once you leave. But it was too big of an opportunity
Sure,
to not.
yeah.
So I had 2 years of college, and I always said, I will go back, and well, I never did. So, but because of
I
that
think
album,
it's going to work out for you.
I think it worked out very good
It worked
for her. It worked out very
but
good.
I'll get to this part, and
Yeah,
that
right.
kind of puts it all together.
I love
Because of
this.
this album, we had a contract to do a 6-week engagement at a little place called Gertie's Folk City in Greenwich Village, Bleecker Street,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness! Everybody that I just mentioned earlier sang there.
See,
Peter,
this is
Paul, and
my
Mary, and-
this is my era that I would have loved. I was from Twin
See,
Falls.
I read about
I
that in the
was
history
from Twin
book.
Falls, Idaho, but I wanted to go to Greenwich Village.
It
I
was
did.
cool. It was great. But we did this little gig at Greenwich Village. I don't think we even got paid much, but it was kind of cool. And the summer before that, I did a 2-month Woodstock apprentice at the Woodstock
Oh
Playhouse.
my God.
And acting was going to be my life. I wanted to be a
Wow.
Broadway actress, not a singer.
Yeah.
But anyway, so in this place called Gertie's Folk City, there was another band there called All Dark and Handsome from Kentucky,
Yeah.
and a Jewish kid from New York that never met a cowboy. You know how that goes.
Sure.
So during our engagement of 6 weeks there, that's when we started dating.
That's
And then
so-
a year later, we got engaged. He moved to New York for a few months. And at first, with a name like Isaacs,
Yeah.
Yes.
my parents were okay with it because I thought he was Jewish too. But he didn't tell me he wasn't Jewish. And I knew they wouldn't approve if he wasn't Jewish. But then when we found out he wasn't, not so much. But they kind of got used to him. And, I said, well, and his father was a preacher, but he wasn't a practicing Christian. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, he had a
Yep.
strong belief,
Yep.
but he wasn't
Yep.
an acting
Yeah.
Christian.
Yep.
So when we got married, we said, let just life be like it is.
Yeah.
I'm Jewish, you're not.
Yeah.
We'll just be together and let it be. And then, something happened to me after. Do you want me
So-
to continue when you do?
You know what? Tell the story, if you don't
love
mind.
this.
Because I think all of this, we're leading to a point with this, and all of
Yep.
these pieces are relevant. But I think our listeners would love to hear the event that happened where you became a Christian. It was
Yes.
out of a tragic experience.
Yes, it was. Yes. Well, my husband and I were married about a year, something like that. And he had a brother that was 4 years older than he was. He was only 27 years old. So one night, in the middle of the night at 2 a.m., we got a phone call. His brother had a car accident and it killed him. He'd hit a tree. You don't know if he's drinking, but he had a wife and 4 children at home. And it was tragic. It was just tragic. So my husband had to go to the place wherever they put recognize that
Yeah.
it was really him.
Yeah.
And being the baby of 17 children, it was a lot. 14 of them lived to be grown. Delma was the first one that died. It was terrible. So, of course, the sadness and crying and tears. And so 3 days later, they had the funeral in a church. And that's the first time I'd ever been in a church in my life, ever. And I didn't know what to do. But, as a family member, and I walked in and everybody was crying and everybody was hugging. And it was nice. And then they had the funeral. And so my sister-in-law said, well, a lot of our family lives in other parts. This was in Ohio, lives in Indiana and Kentucky. Let's get together tomorrow night again at this other little church, just one more time as a family. Well, everybody said yes, and I really fought with the idea. I thought, I don't go to church. I don't even know what this is. And I knew if my parents found out, that would be the end.
Even after you were married, that
Even
was
after
still
I was
a
married,
fear.
yeah. I mean, being raised in Judaism,
Yeah.
and my parents having gone through what they did
Right.
because we were Jewish,
Yeah.
it meant a lot to me
Sure.
to honor the religion.
Right.
Even though I wasn't
Yes.
a practicing Jew about being kosher, going to synagogue,
Right.
it's still that I would never hurt them for the world.
Right. Right.
$10 million wouldn't have hurt them.
Yeah.
So I didn't know what to do. But the more I thought about it, I thought, well, I have to go because I'm a family member, and I'll just sit in the back, mind my own business, and that way, I won't disappoint anyone. So we get in there, and I sit in the back row. Not a big church, maybe held 150 people, 110 people, it was small. And the preacher got up, and he preached a message. It was nice, it was good. And of course, there was a lot of grief and tears because of the death and all. And then he said something. He said, if you want to find Jesus as your Lord, would you get on your knees, come to the altar, and come find the Lord? He's right up here waiting for you. And he just went on and on and on. And I was listening, and I thought, okay, so people started going to the altars. Of course, it was right after the funeral. A lot of people that were there were not going to church at the time. And I sat back there in the back row, and I thought, oh, so I don't know how I did it, but I just got down on my knees in the back seat. And I put the coat over my head, but I cried. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to say, Lord, forgive me my sins. I'm a sinner, because I didn't know that. I didn't know how to say, Lord, forgive me my sins, because I didn't know I had. And I just cried. But that song my girls wrote a few years ago called He Understands My Tears.
Great song.
And I love to say this, the minute my flesh hit the floor, God saw my heart. I didn't have to say a word. And so that was the beginning. But what really got me is when I found out that Jesus was Jewish, just like me. That caught my interest. I thought, okay, I got to read more about this.
Even though, and I've not been around many Jewish people. I was raised, up in the north, and But you were taught not to even say that word, the name of Jesus. And I'm one that believes there's power in that name. But I'm reading all this, and I can't even begin to. So there's another story about all the things that meant, even raising children, and when Ben was born, all of that story. But years down the road, and tell me if I'm moving too fast, but you got to pray with your dad before he passed. Is that right?
I did. My dad wanted to go to Kentucky once when he was living in the holler where Joe's family lived. And so my brother brought him down. He didn't want to fly, so he brought him down in the car. And so we go up in the holler, and my father was very different. He's a quiet man. All of my life he was an alcoholic. I didn't understand that until I got older, and I lost him, because as a young girl growing up, I'll just get onto this and then I'll move on.
This is good. This is so good.
As a young girl, he would work in a bakery at night, and he'd come home in the mornings. So a lot of times I'd be walking to school with my girlfriends from the building, and my father would be hobbling up the street with a big bag of rolls and bread, whatever he could carry, and he could barely walk. He was so drunk. And he'd yell my name, and I ignored him because I didn't want them to see him like that. I was embarrassed, and I didn't understand it. I couldn't figure it out. And so I was upset with him. I was angry with him for doing that. But when he went to Kentucky, of course I was grown, I was on, and he quit drinking, and he just whatever. So we get up in the holler, and my mother and father-in-law prayed before every meal. I mean, they got down on their knees and prayed. They didn't just say grace. And so my father was sitting there, and everybody's getting down on their knees. And I didn't know what to do.
I'm sure.
He was sitting there. And so I thought, well, I can't not get on my knees, So I got down on my knees, and I just was looking at him. He didn't say anything. I figured I'd get a mouthful, but he didn't. And that makes us the first time he saw that. But we didn't talk about it.
Wow.
We didn't talk about it. But on his deathbed, I did get to pray over him. I didn't know he was going to die that day, but he died of kidney failure. Probably because of his drinking. But I got to pray over him. And the same with my mother. She was 95 when I lost her in 2014. And she was very vocal about everything. She never kept any secrets. And she'd tell you what she thought. But she was a 5'1" and just a spry. And she wore lipstick to go pick the mail up in the lobby. She just had to have her hair done every week. What a fighter she was. She was so spry. But I prayed I would tell this little story because it's in the other book. I'm keeping on.
No, this is so good.
You stop me if you want me to say something else.
No.
But Mom was just that one person that no matter what, she tried to make the best out of every situation, always. And when my father died, she remarried, had a wonderful husband. When he passed away, we told her in New York she couldn't stay there any longer because I was here, my brother was in California, so she chose to go to California. And she was there for about 4 or 5 years. And every month I'd go for a week and help my brother. And she was in assisted living, and she she enjoyed herself. She seemed like she did okay. But I never really got to talk to Mom alone. And when she was in California, every night at 6 o'clock, she'd call me on the phone. I don't care if I was in Africa. 6 o'clock California time, she'd call me. So, of course, 6 o'clock California time was 4 o'clock here in Nashville. And so I'd expect every night. And it was a 30-second phone call. Hi, how are you? Are you good? I love you. Have a good night. That was it. She had to hear my voice every night.
Wow.
Right? And it was okay. I got used to it. And if I didn't answer the phone because I was on stage, she'd leave 20 messages. Lily, where are you? I'm going to 20 messages. I saved every one of them.
Oh.
But anyway, having said all that, my mom fell at the age of 95 and broke her hip. And so she had to have hip surgery. So my brother called me. I got on the first plane I could, flew to California, and she might have lasted a week.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother was always there with me, and I thought, Lord, let me have some time alone with her, And so one day he went to work. He decided to go to work, and she wasn't in a coma, but she was just sick, and the surgery they did, I think the morphine just made her sicker, and just at 95, So I went in one morning, and the Lord just told me to open my little Bible that I carried, and it opened up to Psalm 93. And she was lying on the bed, just the blinds were shut and her eyes closed. And so I just walked over to her bed and I opened up my little Bible. I turned my phone light on and I read it to her in her ear, the whole Psalm 93. And I kissed her on the forehead. When I kissed her on the forehead, her face was ice cold, scared me to death.
Yeah.
So I immediately ran out in the lobby and I got one of the nurses. So she came in, got another nurse. She said, she's dying.
No.
Yes. And so they stood around her and tried to, check her and blah, 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 blah. And within 15 minutes, she took her last breath. But guess what? The last voice she heard was mine.
Wow.
Reading the Word of God.
Wow. I have to tell you, one of the, and I said at the beginning, we've not known each other. I mean, I've known who you were, I've been a fan musically and all that, but I saw the picture, and I'm a softie. I'm quick to tears, and I'm thankful for that at my age, that I still can be pricked in the heart. But I broke down and cried like a baby when I saw the picture of Bill Gaither introducing your mother at Carnegie Hall. Was it back in 2001, maybe?
Yeah, right after 9/11.
Yeah.
Now,
I know.
all the things that have had to go on in that moment, way back from you dropping out of school and pursuing music, and now you're back in her city in New York City at Carnegie Hall, one of the most historic venues in that city. And I think, do I remember right that Bill asked you if you thought your mother would be okay with that or something like that?
Well, he asked me if I would invite her. And I said, well, yeah, I think she'd love to come because Carnegie Hall was a big deal, right?
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we sent a car for her and my stepfather. And so they came. And then while we were on stage and we sang, he said, Lily, there's somebody here that's special. And I didn't even know he was going to ask me. So I knew she'd die. And he said, will you bring her out? So I had somebody walk her out. So my mom's strutting out there, just, looking at the audience. And of course they clapped for her. And then he did something that I would have never done. He handed her a mic.
That's awesome.
Of
course he did.
That's awesome.
He said, Miss Say, would you like to say something? And my heart went to the floor because I never know what would come out of her mouth. But this was right after 9/11, probably not even 4 months after. And there were a lot of firefighters and police officers there. And it was honoring all of our first responders because of what had happened. Yeah. And my mother stood there and in her thick Polish accent, she said, I'm proud to be an American.
Yeah.
And she got a standing ovation at Carnegie Hall.
Gaither's also smart enough. He might have set that up too, because he
I
knows.
don't think she would have. Honestly, I don't know if my mother even knew.
His instincts, though.
That's amazing.
His instincts are always uncanny. That he kind of knows what's going to happen.
Wow.
Well, he did a good job of that thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, so. And there's no agenda. There's no notes here. There's no. So we tell the story. your parents are Holocaust survivors. You grew up in that world. You left that. You married somebody, a banjo player from Eastern Kentucky, and now you've got kids, and as a family, you're members of the Grand Ole Opry.
Traveling, singing, stages all across America.
Yeah, and not only members of the Grand Ole Opry, one of the most talented families I've ever been around. That doesn't just happen.
And one of the most loved and respected families.
Except for Ben. I mean,
That's true.
You got to give Ben extra grace.
That's true. But I mean, how many times do I hear an artist, whether it be country, Christian, whatever, when you mention the Isaac's name, it's synonymous with just the
yes, and it's become known as its own style.
It has. You're exactly right.
And that's a very rare thing.
Yeah. So loved. So loved.
So all of that story. Now we fast forward to what's going on in the news today, this week. I think, was it this past Tuesday was the 76th anniversary?
I believe it was, yes.
So when I hear there's anti-Israel agitators, they call them. I've got another word for it, but let's call it agitators. Storming campuses, and they're holding up signs that somebody printed for them, and in some cases, we'll probably get banned from the internet for this, but in some cases, somebody's paying not only to print, but paying them to be out there and protest something. That the story goes only as deep as what they woke up that morning. Now, I think there are some legit people that have taken on this cause, that believe something, but they believe one side of the issue. Mm-hmm. As a guy who watches the news and is fascinated by what's going on, but is more fascinated by the, is it Amos 9:14? Where there's a promise from God that that the Jewish people will someday inhabit what was ruined, and that they will never be uprooted. There is a intersection between what I hear, what I read in the Bible, and what I want to hear from my friend Lily Isaacs about how you watch the news, and what if you could go to these encampments and you knew you could get their attention and you could talk. I want you to tell us what you would say to them.
Yeah.
Well, October 7th was a very hard day for me to take a breath after I saw what happened to these innocent people for no reason at all. You know, just reminded me of 9/11 for no reason at all.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, since the beginning of time, it seems like Jewish people have been persecuted for one reason or another. But it hurts me. It really hurts me. Because I've never known the Jewish people to be the offenders.
Yeah.
They're defenders, but they're not the offensive ones. I think that so many people don't realize that we've been to Israel 17 times, as we said. And we, as American Jews, and we take people of all religions and nationalities with us when we go down to the south, we patronize the Palestinian stores. We buy souvenirs from them. We go to Bethlehem, which is mostly Palestinian. We eat in the restaurants. And when you go to Israel on normal days, the Israelis and the Palestinians, they cohabitate. They respect each other's businesses and live together, and there's no conflict. I don't understand it. There's no conflict. But one day, a terrorist group called Hamas decided they were going to cause an uproar. And unfortunately, the leaders in Palestine are with Hamas. And I don't know what made it happen, but they're the ones that's responsible. It's not the Israelis and it's not the Palestinians.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, thousands of innocent people get caught in the crossfire. But the terrorists are the ones that are causing this.
Wow.
Not the Israelis, not the Palestinians. Because when the war was over in 1945, millions of Jewish people had no place to go. Their homes were destroyed. Their whole lives were uprooted for years. So then in 1948, when Israel became a Jewish nation, the land was given for the Jewish people to live and come home. So millions of Jewish people had a home to go to. But at the same time, the Gaza Strip was given to the Palestinians by the Israelis to live there.
Yeah.
Didn't cost them a thing just to live there. So I don't understand all this uproar because, again, as I'm saying, the terrorists are the ones responsible for this, not the innocent people that live there. So these protests, who are they protesting?
Yes, that's what I want to ask.
It's just the wrong idea. Protest Hamas, protest Hezbollah, protest Iran, who's behind that. Not is the Israelis, because they're just defending their lives and their property. And the same with the Palestinians.
Yep.
We have friends that are Palestinians. They live together there. It's not that they're divided. These terrorist groups are dividing them in perspective.
Yeah.
So do you hear, you don't even have to name names, but do you hear anybody bringing out the point? Because that differential between the Palestinians and the Hamas, we don't hear that. Do you sit and scream at the TV and say, no, that's not it. Say this.
I probably don't scream at the TV and I don't scream at anybody, but in my heart I'm saying that's so wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just wrong. And thank you for even asking that question, because it's sad that so many
it's heartbreaking on every
people
level.
are deceived that way. And I wish they'd really research it, because I feel like I'm telling the truth.
Yeah.
It just makes sense to me, and it's just like, I don't know. When 9/11 happened here in America.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't pick out a sector of people that lived here that did it. It was a terrorist group that caused it.
Attack. That's exactly
right. So this is the same thing.
Yeah.
So are there, have you ever considered running for office? That's my next question.
I don't
just
want to.
curious.
Not running for office. No, thank
you got my vote. I just want to say that.
But no, thank you.
So we don't know how this ends, but we do know the promise of the Scripture, and there's so many things that you read that and you go, even in your book, and if people have not read your book, when I found out we were going to get to talk to you tonight, I bought it on Amazon because I wanted to read.
Thank you.
So you got that 20 cents coming to you. I just want you to know that.
Well, it's on our website, theisaacs.com. We have a store.
That was my question.
And that's how they can.
And she has a second book.
I do have a second book.
Look, it's really good. I brought this for you tonight.
I'm anxious to.
It's a continuation of the story.
I'm not
I
a
love
big
the
book
title,
person.
A wedding dress with combat boots, which
I
I
love it.
absolutely love.
People laugh at me because I don't read a lot of books because I get distracted and my mind starts to wander. So I said to my wife at dinner, I said, so I read Lily Isaac's book, and she kind of, so I don't get that look very often, but.
Well, good for you. Thank you.
There's a songwriter in town named Tony Wood, and Tony made the immortal statement one day. I've had several books published and have another one that'll be coming out this year, but he said, you will go down in history as the only guy who's written more books than you've read. So that's my claim.
Aww.
But I want people to read your story, and I want them to listen to this interview, and I want them to send it to other people and say, hey, before you jump on any bandwagon, you need to hear another version of the story.
I totally agree.
And we feel so thankful that you would trust us with this tonight.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate you having me.
I was thinking about this interview the last couple of days of knowing this, because growing up, I've known Lily for years. And I've heard bits and pieces, but I automatically think, and I'm embarrassed. Not that the Holocaust is ever glamorized. I'm not saying that at all, because it's not. But you hear the Diary of Anne Frank. You hear, for me, it was Corrie ten Boom. Horrible stories. But there's so much of the element of it that you don't hear till you sit here,
Right,
alive, with somebody that her parents were there. She was 2 years old when she brought it. My heart is.
Yes.
It makes me want to say, what can we do? What can we do?
And we asked, the original time we reached out to you, it was going to be a phone conversation. And I asked you, I said, would you be able to come in by where we can look? We wanted to look in your eyes. And there's one other question, and then Dusty, if you got anything.
No, I want her to finish it out and say, what can we do besides pray? I mean, I love how you are so passionate about telling bits and pieces of your stories at the concerts and reminding us of all of this, and especially now. So however, my heart is full.
Yes, me too. I have one other question, and then I want you to answer if you're open to it.
Yeah.
What was the age difference? And I'm sure you've been asked this a bunch, but I don't know the answer to it. So those are the questions I ask. What would have been the age difference of Anne Frank and like your mother or you at the diary? Her diary made history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you also wrote from a diary. You wrote in a diary.
Too.
And I think you even had a name.
Yeah, Lenny.
Lenny, that's what. Sorry, I should have known that. But was the diary? Was that just a common thing for girls, or was that an escape valve for people that lived? Was that a safe place?
Yeah, I think their stories are different. I believe, and she was in a room with her family in a loft.
That's
hidden
right.
for so long.
Yeah.
And I think that just kept her mind occupied to do something. Of course, it made us, it was wonderful to read about that. And, it was something when we went to Bergen-Belsen, where my mom was encamped. We went there several years ago to see it. Anne Frank is buried in the same, her memorial is there in the same camp.
Wow.
So I don't know if they might have even
that was what
I was.
Each other.
I don't know.
That was what I wondered if that may have crossed.
I have no idea.
Now I just heard a couple of weeks ago maybe that her sister also had a diary. Did you hear that?
No, I didn't know that. Maybe it'll come out.
It was on the news that they had found her sister's diary. Wow. But I thought about that when I was reading yours because there were pages, and I just curious if that was a safe place. Much like songwriters do.
Did you ever meet Corrie ten Boom?
No, I never met her. I would love to have met her.
I saw her at CBA.
Yeah.
And I remember just being I was young.
Yeah.
But I remember she was so gentle. But I just remember her wanting to share the story about this and how important it was.
Okay, this may be totally inappropriate and way off the grid, but I saw somebody last week on Instagram, I think, posted that her real name was Corrie Boom 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 Boom. And she just shortened it to 10, so she wouldn't have to write all. Okay, all right.
Wow, Dave.
There it is.
That's funny.
All right. So back to Dusty's question: How can we help? What can we do? How can we help tell the story?
We were kind of in a place that way in 2018.
Yeah.
Because we've seen firsthand going there that there were still Holocaust survivors left that had no food and they were living in poverty. And then the orphanage, which just recently, about 2 years ago, took 200 Ukrainian children in when they were already overcrowded.
Yeah.
And the Israeli soldiers, when you're 18 and you live in Israel, you have to go in the army for 2 years, boys and girls alike. So you know who's in the army now. Your 18-year-old boy or girl for 2 years, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
And when they come out of the military, it's like they have to start all over again. They didn't have a chance to go to college, so they have to learn a trade. So we decided in 2018 that we were going to start this nonprofit called the Isaacs Foundation. Yeah. And we had an online, right after this happened, an online concert to help raise money for everybody.
Yeah, right. That's right.
We raised $100,000 between that and our donors that we divided up between the Holocaust survivors through the Joseph Project. We sent $50,000 to the orphanage because of what they needed. And then the young military men were taken away so quickly to get into the IDF, they didn't have time for toothbrushes, socks, shampoo, just toiletries.
Yeah.
So there's an organization that makes sure they're supplied with the needs, phone chargers, little things you wouldn't think of, right? So, and then we also helped a Palestinian organization to make sure the people there that were left in that town had food. So our organization covers All of it,
I
all of the
Wow.
above.
I love
So
that.
if somebody wants to feel like they want to help, you can go to the isaacsfoundation.org, or if you go to our website, theisaacs.com, you can also have a link there if you want to donate. That way, at least you know, and we're very
Yeah.
reputable. Everything's set
Yes.
up through an
Yep.
accountant. You get a receipt, you get donation cards. But that's the only way we know how to help. Make sure they have food, water, a place to live. All the people in Israel, all of
Wow.
them. So I think that's a good way to
That's
just
awesome.
give back.
This has been awesome. And Dusty, this is
Well,
why.
this is why we tell the stories.
Well, we love to tell the
love
stories.
to tell
Thank
the
you.
stories. Lily, I've always loved you.
I love
and
you too,
thought
Des.
of you as one of the dearest friends.
Thank you.
But tonight, I'm telling you what, it just,
This has
I
been
give it a
amazing.
lot more than I, yeah.
Thank
I
you
needed
so
to
much
hear
for
this. I needed to
allowing
hear
me to
this
do
tonight.
this. Thank
That's
you.
why we love you.
We're glad you were here for this episode of I Love to Tell the Story. Be sure and tune in next time for more with Dusty Wells and Dave Clark. It'll just keep getting better and better. Wait and see.